Security will escort you out if you don't leave voluntarily, my brother Damien sneered as he blocked the entrance to the Grandview Manor ballroom, his designer tuxedo catching the crystal chandelier light. The entire wedding party stared as I stood there in my carefully chosen navy dress, the one I'd saved for months to buy. But 6 months later, when the foreclosure notice arrived and the auctioneer's gavel fell, I smiled and said, "Actually, this is my hotel now." That day changed everything forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of Damien's wedding to Priscilla Whitmore started like any other Saturday in Millbrook Valley, except the entire town was buzzing about the event of the year. The Whitmore family owned half the businesses in town, and their daughter was marrying into what everyone considered local royalty, the Ashford family. My family. Though you wouldn't know it from how they treated me. I woke up in my small studio apartment above Rosie's diner, where I'd been living since turning 18 and moving out of the family estate. The irony wasn't lost on me that I could see the sprawling Ashford mansion from my tiny window, perched on Hillcrest Drive like a monument to everything I'd never be allowed to claim. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns where I used to play as a child, back when I still believed I belonged somewhere. My phone had been suspiciously quiet all morning. No calls about getting ready together, no texts about hair appointments or last-minute preparations. Nothing from my mother, Vivian, who had spent the last year orchestrating this wedding like a military campaign. Nothing from my younger sister, Clarissa, who was serving as maid of honor. And certainly nothing from Damien, who had made it clear months ago that my presence was more of an obligation than a desire. But I had received an invitation. A formal, cream-colored card with gold embossing that arrived 3 months prior, addressed to Miss Juliet Ashford in elegant script. No +1 mentioned, of course, but an invitation nonetheless. I'd kept it propped against my bathroom mirror, a daily reminder that, despite everything, I was still technically family. Still technically invited to witness my brother marry the woman who would cement the Ashford family's place in Millbrook Valley high society. I'd spent weeks preparing for this day. Not just the dress, a simple but elegant navy blue number that I'd found at Henderson's boutique during their end-of-season sale, but emotionally preparing myself to walk back into the world I'd been systematically pushed out of. I'd practiced conversations in the mirror, rehearsed polite responses to the inevitable passive-aggressive comments about my life choices, and steeled myself for 6 hours of pretending that everything was fine. The Grandview Manor sat at the edge of town like something out of a fairy tale, all ivy-covered stone walls and towering spires. It had been the crown jewel of Millbrook Valley for over a century, hosting the weddings of every prominent family for generations. The circular driveway was lined with luxury cars, Mercedes, BMWs, a few Teslas that screamed new money. Valets in crisp uniforms directed traffic, while guests in designer gowns and perfectly tailored suits made their way toward the grand entrance. I parked my 7-year-old Honda Civic between a Porsche and a Lexus, feeling like a sparrow among peacocks. The contrast was deliberate, I knew. Everything about this day was designed to remind people of their place in the hierarchy, and mine was clearly at the bottom. As I walked toward the entrance, I could feel eyes following me, whispered conversations that stopped mid-sentence as I passed. The ghost of the Ashford family, some probably called me. The black sheep who'd had the audacity to choose independence over compliance, who'd walked away from privilege to make her own path. The lobby of Grandview Manor was a symphony of marble and gold, with flower arrangements that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Guests milled about in clusters, champagne glasses catching the light streaming through stained glass windows. I recognized most of them. Millbrook Valley's elite, the same families who'd attended my debutante ball a decade ago, back when I was still considered worth their time. Juliet? The voice belonged to Mrs. Pemberton, my mother's oldest friend. She looked genuinely surprised to see me, her perfectly Botoxed forehead managing the slightest furrow. I didn't expect. How lovely that you could make it. The pause said everything. She didn't expect me to be there because she knew something I was only beginning to suspect. "Of course I'm here," I replied with a smile that felt more confident than I felt. "It's my brother's wedding." Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of something that might have been pity. "Yes, well, enjoy the ceremony, dear." I made my way toward the ballroom, following the flow of guests through corridors lined with oil paintings of long-dead Millbrook Valley patriarchs. The sound of string quartet music drifted from ahead, mixing with the gentle murmur of conversation and the soft click of expensive heels on marble floors. That's when I saw him. Damien stood at the entrance to the ballroom, greeting guests with the kind of practiced charm that had made him popular in prep school and successful in business. At 32, he'd inherited all the best Ashford features: the strong jawline, the piercing blue eyes, the natural charisma that drew people like moths to a flame. He was everything our parents had wanted in a son, and I was everything they'd tried to forget they had in a daughter. Our eyes met across the corridor, and for a split second I saw something flicker across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or annoyance. But it was quickly replaced by something colder, more calculated. He excused himself from the couple he'd been chatting with and walked toward me, his expression growing more serious with each step. Other guests began to notice, conversations quieting as they sensed drama brewing. "Juliet," he said when he reached me, his voice low but carrying clearly in the sudden hush, "what are you doing here?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "I'm here for your wedding, Damien. I was invited." His laugh was sharp, humorless. "That was a mistake. You don't belong here anymore." The words hung in the air like poison, spreading through the crowd of onlookers who pretended not to be listening while hanging on every syllable. I felt heat rise to my cheeks, the familiar sting of public humiliation that I'd experienced so many times in this family. "I have an invitation," I said quietly, reaching into my purse. "I don't care what piece of paper you have," Damien said, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "This is Priscilla's day. This is our family's day. And you are not part of this family anymore. You made that choice when you walked away from everything we offered you." The ballroom entrance loomed behind him, filled with the warm glow of candlelight and the promise of celebration. Inside, I could see guests taking their seats, the altar decorated with white roses and baby's breath. It was beautiful, perfect, and completely off-limits to me. "Security will escort you out if you don't leave voluntarily," Damien continued, his words carrying just loud enough for the growing crowd of spectators to hear. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. The faces around me were a mixture of curiosity, pity, and barely concealed satisfaction. The Ashford family drama was better entertainment than anything they could have hoped for. But I didn't cry, I didn't beg, I didn't make a scene. Instead, I nodded once, turned on my heel, and walked away with whatever dignity I had left intact. I had no idea that 6 months later, I would own the very building that had just rejected me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Growing up in the Ashford mansion on Hillcrest Drive was like living inside a museum exhibit titled The Perfect American Family. Every room was meticulously decorated, every family portrait professionally staged, every public appearance carefully orchestrated. From the outside, we were Millbrook Valley royalty, the kind of family that graced the society pages of the Millbrook Gazette and hosted charity galas that raised 6 figures for worthy causes. But museums are cold places, and our home was no exception. My earliest memory is of standing in the grand foyer at age 5, wearing a white dress with tiny pearl buttons, while my mother Vivian adjusted my post holder for the 100th time. "Stand straight, Juliet," she commanded, her voice sharp despite the smile plastered on her face. "The photographer is coming, and we need to look perfect." Perfect. That word haunted every corner of our lives. Damien, 3 years older than me, had mastered the art of perfection early. He was the golden child who could do no wrong. Star of the junior varsity tennis team at 8, student council president at 12, valedictorian of Millbrook Preparatory Academy at 18. His achievements lined the hallway like trophies, each framed certificate and newspaper clipping a testament to his unwavering excellence. Clarissa, 2 years younger than me, was born with an innate understanding of how to charm her way into our parents' hearts. She had platinum blonde curls that caught the light just right, a dimpled smile that could melt the coldest hearts, and an uncanny ability to say exactly what our parents wanted to hear. While Damien earned love through achievement, Clarissa earned it through pure, effortless appeal. And then there was me, the middle child who never quite figured out the formula. I wasn't brilliant like Damien or naturally charming like Clarissa. I was just ordinary. Average grades despite studying twice as hard as my siblings. Decent at piano but not concert-worthy like Clarissa. Acceptable at tennis but nothing like Damien's natural athleticism. In a family where everything was measured against perfection, ordinary might as well have been failure. Our father, Richard Ashford, was a man who built his fortune in commercial real estate development. He transformed Millbrook Valley from a sleepy rural town into a thriving suburban community, complete with upscale shopping centers, luxury apartment complexes, and the kind of amenities that attracted wealthy families from the city. His success was legendary, his business acumen respected throughout the region. But at home, Richard was a ghost who haunted the periphery of our family life. He worked 16-hour days, traveled constantly for business, and when he was home, he buried himself in paperwork or business calls. His idea of quality time was occasionally looking up from his newspaper to ask about grades or tennis scores. Emotional conversations were as foreign to him as speaking Mandarin. My mother Vivian had been a debutante from a prominent Charleston family before marrying into the Ashford name. She brought with her a deep understanding of social hierarchies, an encyclopedic knowledge of proper etiquette, and an obsession with maintaining appearances that bordered on pathological. Every meal was served on china, every outfit coordinated perfectly, every public outing planned with military precision. Vivian managed our family like a CEO, managing a corporation. Damien was her star performer, Clarissa was her marketing department, and I was the employee who showed up every day but never quite earned a promotion. "Juliet, your posture is atrocious," she would say during dinner parties, her voice carrying just far enough for guests to hear the correction but not the criticism. "And that dress doesn't do you any favors, darling. Perhaps we should discuss your wardrobe choices." The phrase "we should discuss" was Vivian's code for "you have disappointed me again." We discussed my grades, my social skills, my extracurricular activities, my choice of friends, my table manners, my speaking voice, and eventually, my decision to major in business instead of the liberal arts education she deemed more appropriate for young ladies. Every family dinner was a performance. We gathered around the mahogany dining table in the formal dining room, surrounded by oil paintings of ancestors I'd never met and china cabinets filled with wedding gifts from 30 years ago. Conversation followed a predictable script. Damien would share his latest achievements. Clarissa would charm everyone with funny stories from school. Our parents would beam with pride, and I would try desperately to contribute something worthy of their attention. "I got an A on my history presentation," I announced one evening when I was 14, hope creeping into my voice. "That's nice, dear," Vivian replied without looking up from her salmon. "Damien, tell us about the college recruiter who called today." And just like that, my moment was over, eclipsed by whatever triumph Damien had achieved. It became a pattern I learned to expect but never stopped hoping might change. The inequality wasn't just emotional, it was financial too. Damien received a brand new BMW for his 16th birthday, complete with a bow and a professional photographer to capture the moment. Clarissa got a red convertible Mini Cooper that she picked out herself during a shopping trip to the city. When my 16th birthday arrived, I received a practical Honda Civic with 80,000 miles on it, along with a lecture about responsibility and the value of earning one's way in life. "We want to teach you independence," Richard explained, handing me the keys in the garage rather than orchestrating a presentation. "Building character is more important than building comfort." I understood the message. My siblings deserved luxury, while I deserved lessons. The social dynamics of Millbrook Valley reflected our family hierarchy perfectly. At school events, charity functions, and country club gatherings, I watched my siblings effortlessly work rooms full of influential people. Damien commanded respect through his achievements and natural leadership, while Clarissa enchanted everyone with her wit and beauty. I learned to blend into the background, to smile politely when introduced, and to accept that I would always be the other Ashford child. My closest friend during those years was Melody Chen, whose family had moved to Millbrook Valley when her father took a position at the regional hospital. Melody understood what it felt like to be an outsider, though for different reasons. While I was overlooked within my own family, she was overlooked by the community, because she didn't fit their narrow definition of belonging. "Sometimes I think you have it worse than me," Melody said one afternoon as we sat by the lake behind the high school. "At least I know why I don't fit in. You're supposed to belong, but somehow you still don't." She was right. There was something uniquely painful about being excluded from a group you were technically part of, about watching from the inside as love and attention were distributed to everyone except you. The breaking point came during my senior year of high school. College applications were due, and I had worked tirelessly to put together competitive packages for several prestigious universities. My grades weren't perfect, but they were solid. My extracurricular activities showed dedication and leadership. My essay was heartfelt and well-written. I was particularly excited about my application to Westfield University, the same school where Damien was thriving as a business major. The idea of following in his footsteps, of finally finding a way to earn the same respect he commanded, filled me with hope. The rejection letter arrived on a Tuesday in March. I found it among a stack of mail on the kitchen counter, my name printed in Times New Roman on university letterhead. My hands shook as I opened it, reading the polite but firm language that thanked me for my interest while informing me that they would not be offering me admission. "It's probably for the best," Vivian said when I showed her the letter, her voice carrying that particular tone of false comfort she used when she wanted to end uncomfortable conversations quickly. "Westfield might have been too challenging for you anyway. Community college is a perfectly respectable option." I stared at her, waiting for some acknowledgement of my disappointment, some recognition that this represented a real loss for me. Instead, she returned to her morning routine of reading the society pages while sipping coffee from her favorite bone china cup. That night, I called Westfield's admissions office, determined to understand what had gone wrong with my application. After being transferred 3 times, I finally reached an administrator who was willing to review my file. "I see the issue," she said after a few minutes of typing. "Your application shows a withdrawal of your legacy preference. That's unusual. Most families specifically request legacy consideration." My blood ran cold. "I'm sorry, what do you mean by withdrawal?" "Someone from your family contacted our office and requested that your application not receive legacy consideration. Without that preference, your application was evaluated in the general pool, which is significantly more competitive." I hung up the phone and sat in my bedroom for hours, staring at the rejection letter and processing what I'd learned. Someone in my family, someone with the authority to make that call, had actively worked against my admission to Westfield. I never confronted them about it. What would have been the point? Instead, I accepted my place at the state university, worked part-time to pay for expenses that were automatically covered for my siblings, and began the slow process of understanding that my family's love came with conditions I would never be able to meet. The pattern continued through college and into my early 20s. Damien graduated summa cum laude and immediately joined Richard's real estate firm as a junior partner. Clarissa dropped out after sophomore year to pursue modeling, a decision that was celebrated as following her dreams rather than criticized as irresponsible. When I graduated with honors and a degree in business administration, the achievement was acknowledged with a brief congratulations before the conversation moved on to Clarissa's latest photo shoot. By the time I turned 25, I had accepted my role as the family's afterthought. I attended obligatory family gatherings, sent birthday cards and holiday gifts, and maintained the facade of belonging while understanding that I would always be a supporting character in their story. That acceptance made Damien's wedding invitation all the more surprising. For 3 months, I had allowed myself to hope that maybe, finally, I was being welcomed back into the fold. Maybe my brother's happiness had softened the family's attitude toward me. Maybe this was my chance to rebuild the relationships I had always wanted. Standing in that hotel corridor, facing Damien's cold dismissal and the crowd of spectators who seemed to relish my public humiliation, I realized how naive I had been. Some invitations, I learned, are just another way to inflict pain. The drive back to my studio apartment was a blur of tears and shame. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I replayed Damien's words over and over. "You don't belong here anymore." The worst part wasn't even the rejection. It was the part of me that believed he was right. I parked behind Rosie's diner and sat in my car for 20 minutes, watching the Saturday afternoon crowd through the grease-stained windows. Families sharing plates of pancakes, couples laughing over coffee, groups of teenagers celebrating someone's birthday with a chocolate cake that had seen better days. Normal people living normal lives, unburdened by the crushing weight of never being enough. That's when it hit me, the realization that had been building for years but had never crystallized so clearly. I had spent my entire life believing I was fundamentally flawed, that there was something wrong with me that made me unworthy of love, respect, or belonging. Upstairs in my cramped studio, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. The navy dress that had seemed so elegant that morning now looked cheap and desperate. My carefully applied makeup was smudged, my hair disheveled from running my fingers through it in frustration. But it was my eyes that told the real story, defeated, hollow, filled with a sadness so deep it seemed to have taken up permanent residence. "What's wrong with you?" I whispered to my reflection, echoing the question that had haunted me since childhood. "Why aren't you enough?" The apartment felt smaller than usual, suffocating in its reminder of how far I'd fallen from the world I'd grown up in. One room that served as bedroom, living room, and office. A kitchenette with a mini fridge and a hot plate. A bathroom so small I had to step into the shower to close the door. This was what independence looked like when you were the disappointing child who'd chosen to leave rather than continue fighting for scraps of affection. I changed into sweatpants and an old college t-shirt, then opened my laptop and did what I always did when the pain became too much. I lost myself in work. For the past 3 years, I'd been building a small consulting business helping local entrepreneurs navigate the complexities of business licensing and permits. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady, and more importantly, it was mine. My client roster included a mix of dreamers and determined business owners. Patricia Williams, who wanted to open a bakery specializing in gluten-free desserts. Miguel Santos, who was converting an old warehouse into artists' studios. Janet Foster, who had developed a line of organic skincare products she wanted to sell online, and about 15 others who had entrusted me with their hopes and plans. The irony wasn't lost on me that I spent my days helping other people achieve their dreams while feeling like I had none of my own worth pursuing. But their success stories were small victories I could claim, proof that I was capable of something meaningful even if my own family couldn't see it. As I reviewed Patricia's permit applications for the 3rd time that day, my phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, my heart leaped. Maybe someone from the wedding had realized the mistake. Maybe Damien had come to his senses. Maybe... It was from Melody Chen, my old high school friend who now lived in Seattle working as a software engineer. "Saw Clarissa's Instagram story from the wedding. You looked beautiful in that navy dress. Hope you had fun. Call me later if you want to catch up." I stared at the message, confusion mixing with a fresh wave of humiliation. Clarissa had posted about the wedding on social media. I opened Instagram with shaking fingers and navigated to my sister's profile, dreading what I might find. There it was, a perfectly curated series of wedding photos. Clarissa radiant in her pink maid of honor gown, Damien and Priscilla looking like they'd stepped out of a fairy tale, our parents beaming with pride. The caption read, "The most perfect day celebrating the most perfect couple. So grateful to be surrounded by family and love. #Ashford wedding, #family first, #blessed beyond measure." I scrolled through the comments. Dozens of hearts and congratulations from people I'd grown up with, people who had witnessed my humiliation just hours earlier. But what made my stomach drop was realizing that in every single photo, in every carefully staged moment, there was no evidence I had ever existed. Not a single shot that showed an empty chair where I might have sat, no group photo with an obvious gap, nothing to suggest that anyone was missing from this perfect family celebration. They had erased me so completely it was as if I'd never been there at all. "Maybe it's better this way," I said aloud to my empty apartment, the words hanging in the air like a confession. Maybe they're right. Maybe I really don't belong. This was my deepest, darkest belief, the one that had shaped every decision, every relationship, every moment of self-doubt, for as long as I could remember. I believed that there was something fundamentally wrong with me, some essential quality that made me unworthy of the love and acceptance that seemed to come so naturally to everyone else. In elementary school, when other kids were invited to birthday parties I wasn't included in, I told myself it was because I wasn't fun enough. In middle school, when I ate lunch alone while Clarissa held court at the popular table, I convinced myself it was because I wasn't interesting enough. In high school, when boys asked my sister to dances while I stayed home, I decided it was because I wasn't pretty enough. The pattern continued into adulthood. When colleagues got promoted while I stayed in the same position, I assumed it was because I wasn't smart enough. When friendships faded or romantic relationships ended, I concluded it was because I wasn't lovable enough. Every rejection, every disappointment, every moment of exclusion became evidence supporting the same crushing verdict: I wasn't enough. What made it worse was that I had internalized this belief so completely that I had started making choices based on it. I accepted less than I deserved because I believed it was all I was worth. I apologized for taking up space, for having opinions, for existing in ways that might inconvenience others. I had become an expert at making myself smaller, quieter, less threatening to the people around me. Even starting my own business had been motivated more by the belief that I wasn't good enough to work for anyone else than by genuine entrepreneurial ambition. I told myself I was being independent, but the truth was I was hiding, creating a world small enough that I couldn't be rejected, hurt, or found wanting. As I sat in my studio apartment that Saturday evening, still wearing my wedding rejection like a scarlet letter, I realized that my family hadn't created this belief in me. They had simply confirmed what I already suspected about myself. Every slight, every overlooked achievement, every moment of preferential treatment given to my siblings had been interpreted through the lens of my own fundamental inadequacy. The most insidious part was how this belief had become self-fulfilling. Because I expected to be overlooked, I made myself easy to overlook. Because I believed I didn't deserve good things, I settled for mediocrity. Because I was convinced I wasn't worthy of love, I pushed away anyone who might have cared about me. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and started making a list, not of goals or dreams, but of evidence supporting my worthlessness. The page filled quickly. Not smart enough for Westfield University. Not successful enough to afford a real apartment. Not important enough to deserve a seat at my own brother's wedding. Not lovable enough to maintain lasting relationships. Not talented enough to build a meaningful career. The list went on for 2 pages, 27 years of accumulated proof that I was exactly what my family had always treated me as, the expendable one, the disappointment, the mistake they wished they could undo. But as I reached the bottom of the second page, something strange happened. My hand cramped from writing, and I had to stop. In that moment of physical discomfort, I looked at what I'd created. 2 pages of vicious self-attack, written in my own handwriting, compiled by my own hand. "Jesus, Juliet," I whispered, staring at the toxic inventory I'd just created. "What are you doing to yourself?" For the first time in hours, maybe years, a different voice spoke up from somewhere deep inside me. It was quiet, almost tentative, but it was there. What if they're wrong? What if the problem isn't you? I shook my head, dismissing the thought almost immediately. It was easier to believe I was flawed than to consider the alternative, that my family's treatment of me said more about them than it did about me. That possibility was too dangerous to entertain because it would mean everything I'd accepted about myself might be wrong. But the voice didn't go away. It kept whispering, growing slightly stronger with each repetition. What if you're enough exactly as you are? What if you always have been? I crumpled up the legal pad pages and threw them in the trash, but I couldn't throw away the questions they'd raised. As night fell over Millbrook Valley, I sat by my window looking out at the lights of the town where I'd never quite fit in, wondering if maybe, just maybe, the problem wasn't that I didn't belong anywhere. Maybe the problem was that I'd been trying to belong in the wrong places all along. Monday morning arrived with the kind of relentless sunshine that felt like mockery after a weekend of emotional devastation. I dragged myself out of bed at 7, made instant coffee in my chipped mug, and tried to pretend that the hollow ache in my chest was just caffeine withdrawal. The wedding humiliation had settled into my bones like a chronic illness. But bills didn't pay themselves, and clients didn't care about my personal drama. I was reviewing Patricia Williams' bakery lease agreement when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, probably a telemarketer, but I answered anyway. Any distraction from my own thoughts was welcome. Juliet Ashford? The voice was crisp, professional, with a slight accent I couldn't place. Speaking. This is Helena Rostova from Meridian Investment Group. We've been reviewing your business profile, and we have a proposition that might interest you. I sat up straighter. Meridian Investment Group wasn't a name I recognized, but it sounded legitimate. I'm listening. We're expanding our portfolio of small business consultants across the region, and your track record with local entrepreneurs has caught our attention. We'd like to discuss a partnership opportunity that could significantly expand your client base and revenue potential. My heart started beating faster. What kind of partnership? We're prepared to offer you a contract to handle all business licensing and permitting for our property development projects throughout the tri-state area. The initial contract would be worth $2.3 million over 3 years, with the potential for expansion based on performance. I nearly dropped the phone. $2.3 million. That was more money than I'd made in my entire career combined. I'm sorry, I think there might be some mistake. My business is pretty small scale. I work mostly with local startups and… Ms. Ashford, we don't make mistakes. Our research team has been monitoring your work for several months. Your success rate with permit approvals is 94%, which is remarkable in this regulatory environment. Your clients consistently report satisfaction with your thoroughness and attention to detail. Most importantly, you have a reputation for integrity, something that's increasingly rare in this industry. My mind was racing. This had to be some kind of scam. Investment groups didn't just call random small business owners with million-dollar contracts. How did you get my information? Patricia Williams recommended you. She's been working with one of our subsidiary companies to secure funding for her bakery expansion, and she couldn't stop praising your work. When we looked into your background, we were impressed by what we found. Patricia. Sweet, determined Patricia, who had struggled for months to navigate the labyrinth of health department regulations and zoning requirements for her gluten-free bakery. I had spent countless hours walking her through every step of the process, often working late into the evening to ensure her applications were perfect. She had sent me a handmade thank you card when she finally got her permits, along with a batch of her experimental almond flour cookies. This sounds too good to be true, I said honestly. Helena laughed, a warm sound that somehow made her seem more trustworthy. I understand your skepticism. Why don't we arrange a meeting? I'm flying into Millbrook Valley tomorrow afternoon. We could discuss the details over dinner, somewhere comfortable. Do you know the Grandview Manor? I've heard their restaurant is excellent. The name hit me like a physical blow, Grandview Manor. The scene of my humiliation just 2 days earlier. The place where I'd been kicked out by my own brother, where I'd stood in a corridor full of judgmental eyes and felt myself shrink to nothing. Actually, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice, could we meet somewhere else? I know a great little place downtown. Of course. You choose the location, and I'll adjust my plans accordingly. Shall we say 7 o'clock? After we finalized the details for meeting at Cafe Luna, a quiet bistro near the town square, I hung up and stared at my phone in disbelief. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like me. I was the overlooked one, the disappointment, the sister who got kicked out of weddings. I wasn't the kind of person who got million-dollar business opportunities. But as the initial shock wore off, doubt crept in like fog rolling over the valley. Why would a major investment group want to work with me? What if this was some kind of elaborate joke? What if my family had somehow orchestrated this to give me false hope before pulling it away? The thought made me feel sick, but I couldn't shake it. I spent the rest of Monday researching Meridian Investment Group online. They were legitimate. A mid-sized firm based in Boston with a solid track record of property development and business investment. Helena Rostova was listed as their Director of Regional Partnerships, with an impressive resume that included degrees from Harvard Business School and previous experience with several major consulting firms. Still, the timing felt suspicious. 2 days after the worst rejection of my life, suddenly opportunity comes knocking. It felt like the universe was either playing a cruel joke or offering some kind of cosmic compensation. That evening, I called Patricia to verify Helena's story. Oh my goodness, yes. Patricia's excitement was immediately apparent. She was asking so many questions about you, about how you helped me navigate all those regulatory nightmares. I told her you were absolutely brilliant, that you saved my business before it even started. Juliet, this could be huge for you. The validation felt good, but it didn't completely quiet the voice in my head, insisting that I didn't deserve this kind of break. Did she say why they were looking for someone local? Something about wanting consultants who understand regional regulations and have relationships with local officials. Honestly, I was just happy to give you a good reference after everything you've done for me. After hanging up, I stood in my tiny kitchenette making dinner, ramen noodles with frozen vegetables, the kind of meal that reminded me daily of how far my life was from my siblings' privilege, and tried to process what was happening. If this opportunity was real, it could change everything. Not just financially, but personally. It could prove that I was capable of success, that I had value beyond being the family disappointment. But accepting it would mean stepping into a world I'd never navigated before. $1 million contracts, investment groups, regional partnerships. These were the kinds of opportunities that people like Damien took for granted, not something someone like me was supposed to handle. Tuesday crawled by with agonizing slowness. I tried to focus on my existing clients, but my mind kept drifting to the evening meeting. I changed outfits 3 times, settling finally on a black blazer and gray slacks that I hoped struck the right balance between professional and approachable. I arrived at Café Luna 15 minutes early and ordered a coffee I was too nervous to drink. Helena Rostova walked in at exactly 7 o'clock, and I recognized her immediately from the photo on the Meridian website. She was probably in her mid-40s, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, and the kind of confident bearing that suggested she was used to commanding rooms full of important people. Juliet? She extended a perfectly manicured hand. Helena Rostova, thank you for meeting with me on such short notice. We settled into a corner booth, and Helena ordered wine while I stuck with coffee, afraid that alcohol might compromise my ability to evaluate whether this was real or too good to be true. Let me be direct, Helena said after our drinks arrived. Meridian is expanding aggressively into secondary markets throughout New England. We've found that success in these regions depends heavily on local expertise. People who understand the regulatory landscape, who have relationships with municipal officials, who can navigate the political dynamics that often make or break development projects. She opened a leather portfolio and slid a document across the table. This is our standard partnership agreement. The initial contract guarantees you a minimum of $2.3 million in fees over 3 years, with performance bonuses that could potentially double that amount. I stared at the contract, trying to process the numbers. The base monthly retainer alone was more than I typically made in 6 months. This is incredibly generous. But I have to ask, why me? There are larger consulting firms, people with more experience. Larger firms often means bureaucracy and inefficiency, Helena interrupted. We've worked with the big players, and frankly, we're not impressed. They're expensive, slow, and they don't have the local relationships that someone like you has built over years of working in this community. She leaned forward, her expression becoming more intense. Juliet, I've spent the last 3 months researching consultants throughout this region. Your success rate is extraordinary. Your client testimonials are glowing, and everyone I've spoken with describes you as incredibly thorough and reliable. That's exactly what we need. But I've never handled anything close to this scale, which is why we're offering comprehensive support. You'd have access to our legal team, our research department, our administrative staff. Think of this as scaling up your existing expertise, not learning an entirely new skill set. I read through the contract terms, my hands trembling slightly. It was real. The numbers were real, the opportunity was real, And for the first time in my adult life, someone was telling me I was exactly what they needed. "There is one condition," Helena added, and my heart sank. Here it comes, I thought, the catch that would make this impossible. "We need an answer by Friday. The property we're planning to develop is time-sensitive, and we need to know if you're our partner or if we need to look elsewhere." 4 days. 4 days to decide whether to leap into the biggest opportunity of my life or stay safe in my small world of local clients and modest success. As I walked back to my apartment that night, contract tucked carefully in my purse, I realized that everything had changed. Not just the potential money or the career opportunity, but something deeper. For the first time in years, maybe ever, someone had looked at my work and decided I was not just adequate but exceptional. The question was, did I believe them? Wednesday morning found me sitting at my kitchen table at 5 a.m., staring at the Meridian contract spread across the scratched Formica surface. I'd read it so many times the legal language had started to blur together, but the numbers remained crisp and impossible. $2.3 million. Minimum. Over 3 years. The rational part of my brain kept insisting this was my chance, the opportunity I'd been working toward without even realizing it. But the other voice, the one that had been my constant companion for 27 years, whispered a steady stream of doubts. "You're not qualified for this. You'll embarrass yourself. They'll figure out you're a fraud. Remember what happened at Westfield? Remember the wedding? This is just another setup for disappointment." I made my 3rd cup of coffee and opened my laptop, pulling up my client files. Patricia's bakery permit application, successfully approved after months of regulatory back and forth. Miguel's artist studio conversion, which had required navigating 3 different municipal departments and a historical preservation committee. Janet's online skincare business, where I'd helped her understand FDA labeling requirements and state licensing protocols. Looking at the stack of successful projects, I tried to see what Helena Rostova saw, a 94% success rate, she'd said. Client testimonials praising my thoroughness and attention to detail. But all I could see were the small victories, the local scope, the comfortable boundaries of a business I'd built specifically to avoid the kind of high-stakes pressure that came with million-dollar contracts. My phone buzzed with a text from Melody in Seattle, "Thinking about you after the weekend drama. Coffee date via video call tonight. I want to hear everything." The reminder of the wedding sent a fresh wave of anxiety through my chest. How could I even consider taking on a major business opportunity when I couldn't even maintain my place in my own family? If my own brother thought I didn't belong at his wedding, what made me think I belonged in boardrooms with investment executives? I closed the laptop and got dressed for my day, which included meetings with 2 potential new clients and a permit review session with the county planning office. Normal work. Safe work. The kind of professional interaction where I knew exactly what was expected and confident I could deliver. The first meeting was with David Kim, a Korean War veteran who wanted to open a small auto repair shop in the old industrial district. He was 73 years old, had saved money for 15 years to fund this dream, and needed help navigating the environmental regulations for automotive businesses. "My grandson thinks I'm crazy," he said, settling into the chair across from my tiny desk. "Says I should be playing golf, not starting a business. But I've been fixing cars since I was 16. It's what I know, what I love. I just need someone to help me understand all this paperwork." As we worked through his preliminary applications, I found myself thinking about courage. Here was a man in his 70s, willing to risk his savings and reputation on a dream, despite everyone telling him he was too old, too set in his ways, too unrealistic. He was facing down bureaucracy, regulations, and family skepticism because he believed in something. What did I believe in? The second meeting was with Sarah Martinez, a young mother who had developed a line of children's educational toys and wanted to understand the safety regulations for product manufacturing and distribution. She bounced her 18-month-old daughter on her knee while explaining her business plan, occasionally pausing to wipe the toddler's nose or retrieve dropped crayons. "Everyone tells me I should wait until Isabella is older," she said, gesturing to her daughter who was attempting to eat a purple crayon. "They say starting a business with a baby is impossible, that I should focus on being a mom first. But I spent 5 years as a teacher before Isabella was born, and I know there's a gap in the market for really high-quality, developmentally appropriate toys. I watched Sarah's face light up as she described her product designs, the research she'd done on child development, the manufacturing contacts she'd cultivated. Despite the chaos of managing a toddler during our meeting, her passion was infectious, her preparation thorough, her vision clear. Here was another person willing to risk everything on their own judgment, despite what everyone around them was saying. Sarah believed in her idea strongly enough to pursue it, even when the timing seemed impossible, even when people she trusted told her to wait. After both meetings, I drove to the county planning office for what should have been a routine permit review. But as I sat in the waiting room, surrounded by contractors and developers discussing projects worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, I realized something had shifted in how I saw myself. For years, I'd positioned my work as helping other people achieve their dreams, while assuming I didn't have any worth pursuing. But today, watching David and Sarah fight for their visions despite external skepticism, I understood that I'd been living someone else's definition of my limitations. The permit review went smoothly. It always did when I was involved, because I prepared obsessively and understood the system better than most of the contractors who regularly worked with the county. As I walked back to my car, Jim Henderson from the planning department called out to me, "Juliet, hold up a second." Jim was a 15-year veteran of local government, the kind of bureaucrat who could make or break development projects with a single signature. He'd always been professional with me, but today his expression was different, more respectful, almost admiring. "I've been meaning to tell you," he said, "your applications are always flawless. Most of the consultants who come through here, they're sloppy, they miss details, they waste my time with incomplete paperwork. But your stuff, perfect every time. The other guys in the office have started using your submissions as examples of how things should be done." "Thank you," I managed, unsure how to respond to praise I'd never heard before. "I'm not just blowing smoke," Jim continued. "In 15 years, I've never seen anyone with your attention to detail and understanding of the regulatory landscape. You could be working with the big development firms, making real money. You're too good for these small-time projects." As I drove home, Jim's words echoed in my head alongside Helena's offer. Two separate, unrelated sources telling me the same thing. I was undervaluing myself, working below my capabilities, settling for less than I deserved. That evening's video call with Melody became an impromptu therapy session. I told her everything: the wedding humiliation, the family dynamics, the Meridian opportunity, my paralyzing fear that I wasn't qualified for success. "Let me get this straight," Melody said, her laptop camera showing her in her Seattle apartment with Mount Rainier visible through the window behind her. "A major investment firm wants to pay you millions of dollars because you're exceptionally good at your job, and you're worried you don't deserve it because your dysfunctional family doesn't appreciate you? When you put it like that, it sounds ridiculous. Because it is ridiculous. Juliet, I've known you for 10 years. You are the most thorough, dedicated, reliable person I've ever met. You helped me through calculus in high school. You talked me through my college applications. You've been my career advisor from 3,000 miles away. You see everyone else's potential except your own." I stared at my reflection in the laptop screen, trying to see what Melody saw instead of what I'd always believed about myself. But what if I fail? What if I take this contract and mess it up spectacularly? What if they realize they made a mistake? What if you succeed? What if you're exactly as capable as they think you are? What if the only person who doesn't believe in you is you? After we hung up, I made myself a simple dinner and sat by my window watching the lights of downtown Millbrook Valley. Somewhere out there, David Kim was probably working on his business plan, determined to open his auto shop despite his grandson's skepticism. Sarah Martinez was probably researching toy manufacturing regulations while her daughter slept, refusing to let other people's timelines dictate her dreams. Both of them had something I'd never allowed myself to have: faith in their own judgment over other people's opinions. I pulled the Meridian contract toward me one more time, but instead of reading the legal terms, I focused on the cover letter Helena had included. "Your success rate is extraordinary. Everyone describes you as incredibly thorough and reliable. You're exactly what we need." For the first time, I tried to read those words not as flattery or mistake, but as simple facts. What if they were right? What if I was exactly as good at my job as the evidence suggested? What if 27 years of family rejection had taught me to doubt objective reality? The deadline was Friday. 2 more days to decide whether to trust other people's assessment of my abilities or continue believing my family's assessment of my worth. For the first time in my life, the choice felt like mine to make. Thursday arrived with the weight of an ultimatum. 1 day left to give Helena Rostova an answer. 1 day to decide whether I would step into the biggest opportunity of my life or remain safely trapped in the small world I'd built around my fears. I woke up before my alarm, my stomach churning with a mixture of anxiety and something else. Something that felt dangerously close to excitement. The Meridian contract sat on my kitchen counter like a dare, its crisp pages promising everything I'd never allowed myself to want. Financial security, professional recognition, the chance to prove that I was more than the sum of my family's low expectations. But first, I had to get through a day of regular clients and routine work, pretending my entire future wasn't hanging in the balance. My morning started with a call from Patricia Williams, who was practically vibrating with excitement over the phone. "Juliet, you'll never guess what happened? The food critic from the Regional Tribune came to try my gluten-free chocolate tart yesterday. She loved it so much she's writing a feature article about the bakery for next month's lifestyle section. I'm going to be in a real newspaper." Patricia's joy was infectious, but it also highlighted everything that was at stake with the Meridian decision. Patricia's success had started with the permit applications I'd helped her navigate, the regulatory hurdles we'd cleared together. If I took the Meridian contract, I'd be trading relationships like this for corporate partnerships and million-dollar projects. "That's incredible, Patricia. You deserve all of this recognition." "I couldn't have done any of it without you," she said, her voice becoming more serious. "You believed in my dream when I wasn't even sure I believed in it myself. That means everything to a person trying to build something from nothing." After hanging up, I sat in my car outside the coffee shop where I'd grabbed my morning latte, thinking about Patricia's words. She'd been terrified when she first came to me, a middle-aged woman with no business experience, trying to navigate health department regulations and zoning laws that seemed designed to discourage exactly the kind of small, local business she wanted to create. But I'd seen something in her plan that she couldn't see in herself. It was solid, well-researched, and filled a genuine need in the community. I'd spent weeks walking her through every step of the process, explaining regulations, helping her understand timelines, even connecting her with contractors who specialized in commercial kitchen installations. Now she was succeeding beyond her wildest dreams, and she credited me with making it possible. What if Helena Rostova saw the same potential in me that I'd seen in Patricia? What if I was the one who couldn't recognize my own capabilities? The rest of the morning passed in a blur of emails and phone calls. I reviewed permit applications, answered questions about zoning requirements, and scheduled meetings for the following week. Normal work that felt surreal given the decision looming over me. At noon, I drove to the Millbrook Valley Community Center for my monthly volunteer session, helping seniors navigate Social Security and Medicare paperwork. It was work I'd been doing for 3 years, unpaid time that I gave, because I remembered how overwhelming bureaucracy could feel when you didn't understand the system. Today's group included Mrs. Eleanor Fitzgerald, an 82-year-old widow who was trying to understand her prescription drug coverage, and Frank Rodriguez, a recent retiree who needed help appealing a Medicare decision. I spent 2 hours walking them through forms, explaining terminology and making phone calls to clarify policy details. "You're an angel," Mrs. Fitzgerald said as we finished reviewing her paperwork. "I was so worried about these medical bills, but you made everything make sense. How do you know all this stuff?" "I just research until I understand it," I replied, but as the words left my mouth, I realized how significant that skill was. Most people didn't have the patience or the analytical ability to decode complex regulatory systems. They found the bureaucracy overwhelming and gave up, accepted less than they deserved, or paid professionals to handle things they could have managed themselves if someone had just explained the process clearly. That's what I did. I made complicated systems understandable. I took chaos and created order. I helped people achieve their goals by removing the barriers that seemed impossible to overcome alone. Maybe that skill was more valuable than I'd ever realized. As I was packing up my materials, Frank Rodriguez pulled me aside. "Can I ask you something personal?" he said, glancing around to make sure the others weren't listening. "What do you do for work? Because whatever it is, you're wasting your time with it. You should be running some big consulting firm, helping people with serious money problems. You've got a gift for this stuff." I drove home in a daze, Frank's words joining the growing chorus of voices telling me I was capable of more than I'd allowed myself to pursue. Patricia, Jim Henderson, Helena Rostova, Melody, and now Frank, all seeing something in me that I'd been trained not to see in myself. That evening, I called my father. I hadn't spoken to Richard Ashford since the wedding debacle, and I wasn't even sure he'd answer the phone. But I needed to understand something before I could move forward with my decision. "Juliet," his voice was neutral, businesslike. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you." "I have a question about something that happened years ago," I said, cutting straight to the point. "My Westfield University application. Someone from our family called to withdraw my legacy preference. Was it you?" The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, he sighed. "Your mother thought it would be better if you started at a less challenging school. She was worried you'd struggle to keep up at Westfield, that it might damage your confidence. So you sabotaged my college application to protect my feelings? We were trying to set you up for success, Juliet. Westfield can be demanding. Your mother didn't want you to be overwhelmed." I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar burn of anger and hurt. Did it occur to either of you to let me make that choice for myself? To let me try and maybe fail on my own terms? You were 17, you didn't understand. I understood perfectly. I understood that my own parents didn't believe I was capable of success. I took a deep breath, feeling something shift inside me. I'm 27 now, Dad. I've been running my own business for 3 years. I've helped dozens of people achieve their goals. And right now, I have an opportunity that you probably wouldn't think I'm qualified for. What kind of opportunity? The kind that would prove you and Mom were wrong about me. I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking with adrenaline and something that felt like liberation. For the first time in my adult life, I had told my father exactly what I thought of his parenting choices. I had named the damage they'd done instead of making excuses for it. More importantly, I had heard myself defending my own accomplishments, my own capabilities, my own worth. I pulled out my laptop and opened a new email to Helena Rostova. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as 27 years of conditioning warred with a growing certainty that I deserved this chance. "Dear Helena," I typed, then stopped. Everything hinged on the next few sentences. Accept the contract, and I'd be committing to a level of professional challenge I'd never attempted. Decline it, and I'd be choosing safety over possibility, fear over growth. I thought about David Kim, willing to risk his savings at 73 to pursue his dream. Sarah Martinez, starting a business with a toddler on her hip because she believed in her vision. Patricia Williams, transforming her love of baking into a thriving business despite having no experience with commercial operations. All of them had faced the same choice I was facing: believe in themselves or believe in other people's limitations. "Dear Helena," I typed again, this time with steady fingers. "After careful consideration, I am pleased to accept Meridian Investment Group's partnership offer. I look forward to beginning our collaboration and proving that your confidence in my abilities is well placed." I read the email 3 times, my cursor hovering over the send button. This was it, the point of no return. Once I sent this email, I'd be committed to the biggest professional challenge of my life. There would be no more hiding behind small projects and safe clients. I'd have to rise to meet expectations I'd never allowed anyone to have of me. My phone buzzed with a text from Damien. "Mom says you were rude to Dad last night. We need to talk." I stared at the message, then looked back at my laptop screen. My brother, who had kicked me out of his wedding, was now summoning me for a conversation about my behavior. My family, who had spent decades undermining my confidence, was trying to pull me back into their familiar patterns of control and diminishment. But I had a choice. I could respond to Damien's text, get drawn back into their dysfunction, continue allowing their opinion of me to determine my decisions. Or I could choose to believe in the evidence of my own competence, the validation of clients and colleagues who had no reason to lie to me about my abilities. I clicked send on the email to Helena, then deleted Damien's text without responding. For the first time in my life, I had chosen to believe in myself over my family's version of who I was supposed to be. Everything that happened next would be on my own terms. Helena's response arrived within 2 hours of my acceptance email, and it changed everything faster than I could have imagined. Excellent decision, Juliet. I'll have our legal team overnight the finalized contracts to you. In the meantime, I'd like you to meet someone who will be crucial to your success in this partnership. Are you available for lunch tomorrow at noon? I'm bringing in Marcus Chen, our head of regional development, who will be your primary liaison for all Meridian projects. Marcus Chen. The name stopped me cold as I read it again. It couldn't be the same Marcus Chen. Melody's older brother who had graduated from Millbrook Prep 2 years ahead of me, who had gone on to MIT for engineering and then disappeared into the world of high-stakes business development. The Marcus Chen who had been one of the few people in high school who had actually talked to me like I was worth listening to. I called Melody immediately. Please tell me your brother Marcus doesn't work for Meridian Investment Group, I said without preamble. Her laughter confirmed my worst fears. Oh my God, he does! He's been there for like 3 years now. Wait, is he involved in your big contract opportunity? He's going to be my primary liaison. I sank into my desk chair, feeling the universe's sense of humor at work. Melody, I can't do this. Your brother knew me in high school. He'll remember how invisible I was, how I never spoke up in classes, how I ate lunch by myself half the time. Stop. Melody's voice was firm. First of all, Marcus always thought you were brilliant. He used to tell me you were the smartest person in your grade, just too quiet for anyone to notice. Second, that was 10 years ago. You're not the same person you were in high school. But what if he sees me the same way? What if he thinks Helena made a mistake? Then you'll prove him wrong. Juliet, my brother doesn't work on projects he doesn't believe in. If he's willing to be your liaison, it means he already knows you're good at what you do. After hanging up, I spent the evening researching Marcus's career trajectory. MIT graduate, early employee at a successful tech startup, MBA from Wharton, 3 years at Meridian, with an impressive track record of successful developments across New England. He'd become exactly the kind of high-achieving professional I'd always assumed was out of my league. The next morning, I drove to Grandview Manor for our lunch meeting, and the irony wasn't lost on me. 1 week after being kicked out of this building by my own brother, I was returning as a business partner, worth millions of dollars to the company that now wanted to work with me. Helena was waiting in the lobby when I arrived, but she wasn't alone. The man standing beside her was definitely Marcus Chen, though the years had added confidence to his bearing and laugh lines around his eyes. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit and looked every inch the successful executive he'd become. Juliet Ashford, he said, extending his hand with a genuine smile. I was hoping it was you when Helena described our new consultant. It's been way too long. His warmth caught me off guard. There was no condescension, no surprise that quiet Juliet from high school had somehow landed a major business contract. Just professional respect and what seemed like genuine pleasure at seeing me again. Over lunch, Marcus outlined Meridian's expansion plans for the region. They were targeting secondary markets throughout New England, focusing on mixed-use developments that combined residential, commercial, and retail spaces. The regulatory complexity was enormous. Multiple municipal jurisdictions, varying zoning laws, environmental considerations, and the political dynamics of communities that were often resistant to large-scale development. What we've learned, Marcus explained, is that success in these markets depends heavily on local relationships and regulatory expertise. We can bring the capital and the development experience, but we need someone who understands how to navigate the specific challenges of each community. That's where you come in, Helena added. Your track record shows you don't just understand the regulations, you understand the people behind them. That's incredibly valuable in this business. As they described the first project, a $40 million mixed-use development in Riverside County about an hour from Millbrook Valley, I felt a familiar excitement building. This was the kind of complex challenge I'd always been drawn to, the type of puzzle that required careful analysis, strategic thinking, and meticulous attention to detail. The timeline is aggressive, Marcus warned. We need all permits and approvals within 8 months to meet our construction schedule. Most consultants would say that's impossible given the scope of regulatory requirements. Most consultants probably haven't spent 3 years building relationships with every planning department within a 2-hour radius, I replied, surprising myself with my confidence. 8 months is tight, but it's doable if we start with a comprehensive regulatory audit and identify potential bottlenecks early in the process. Marcus and Helena exchanged a look that I couldn't quite read, but Helena was smiling. That's exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need, she said. Marcus, why don't you show Juliet the project files so she can begin her preliminary assessment? The next 2 hours flew by as Marcus walked me through architectural plans, site surveys, environmental reports, and zoning analysis. The project was massive: 300 residential units, 50,000 square feet of retail space, and a community center that would require coordination between county planners, state environmental agencies, and 3 different municipal authorities. It was also fascinating. The development would transform an abandoned industrial site into a vibrant community hub, creating hundreds of jobs and providing much-needed housing in a region where young families were being priced out by limited inventory. I have to ask, Marcus said as we reviewed the environmental assessment, are you sure you want to take this on? It's a significant step up from local small business consulting. The question hung in the air between us, and I realized this was another moment of choice. I could acknowledge my limitations, admit that this might be beyond my capabilities, retreat to the safety of smaller projects and familiar challenges. Or I could trust the evidence of my own competence and rise to meet the opportunity in front of me. I'm sure, I said, meeting his eyes directly. This is exactly the kind of work I've been preparing for, even if I didn't know it at the time. Marcus nodded slowly. Good. Because Helena wasn't exaggerating about your reputation. I've spent the last week calling contacts throughout the region, and everyone who's worked with you says the same thing. Thorough, reliable, gets results. That's exactly what we need for a project this complex. As we wrapped up the meeting, Helena handed me a leather portfolio containing copies of all the project documents. Take the weekend to review everything thoroughly. Monday morning, we'll start the formal engagement process. Are you ready for this, Juliet? I thought about the question as I drove home, the portfolio beside me on the passenger seat like a tangible representation of the new path I'd chosen. Ready? Probably not completely. This was uncharted territory, a level of professional responsibility I'd never handled before. But I was qualified. 3 years of successful projects had given me the skills I needed. Relationships with regulatory officials throughout the region had given me the connections I needed. And for the first time in my life, I was working with people who believed in my abilities rather than despite them. That evening, I spread the project documents across my living room floor, creating a workspace that took up every inch of available surface. Site plans taped to walls, regulatory checklists organized by jurisdiction, timeline charts color-coded by department. As I worked, I thought about the distance I'd traveled in just 1 week. 7 days ago, I'd been the excluded sister, sitting by myself while my family celebrated without me. Tonight, I was the lead consultant on a $40 million development project, trusted with responsibilities that would have seemed impossible a month ago. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Marcus. Forgot to mention, I've already started telling people we have the best regulatory consultant in New England on our team. Don't make me look bad. Closing parenthesis quote. I stared at the message, reading it 3 times. The best regulatory consultant in New England. Was that really how he saw me? How they saw me? Maybe it was time I started seeing myself that way too. I texted back, I'll do my best to live up to the hype. His response came immediately. Based on what I've heard about your work, the hype is probably an understatement. For the first time in my adult life, I was working with people who expected excellence from me rather than disappointment. People who saw my potential rather than my limitations. People who treated me like a valuable professional rather than an obligation to be managed. As I continued reviewing the project documents late into the night, I realized I wasn't just taking on a new job. I was stepping into a completely different version of myself, one where success was expected rather than surprising, where my abilities were recognized rather than overlooked, where I belonged at the table rather than watching from the sidelines. The question now was whether I could live up to their confidence in me. Based on everything I'd learned about myself in the past week, I was starting to believe I could. The transformation happened faster than I could have imagined. Within 2 weeks of signing the Meridian contract, my entire professional world had expanded beyond recognition. Gone were the days of working from my studio apartment kitchen table. Helena had arranged for a proper office space in the downtown Millbrook Valley business district, complete with a conference room, dedicated phone lines, and administrative support. Walking into my new office on that first Monday morning felt surreal. The nameplate on the door read, "Juliet Ashford, Senior Regulatory Consultant," and I must have stared at it for 5 minutes before finally using my key. The space was 3 times larger than my entire apartment, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Main Street and enough wall space to display the project charts and regulatory timelines that had previously covered my living room floor. But the real change wasn't the office, it was how people responded to me. "Ms. Ashford, welcome to Riverside County Planning," said Director Janet Walsh when I arrived for my first official meeting regarding the mixed-use development. 6 months earlier, I would have been lucky to get 15 minutes with a junior planner. Now I was meeting with the department head, and she was treating me like a peer rather than a supplicant. "I've heard excellent things about your work from colleagues in neighboring counties," she continued, settling into her chair with a stack of preliminary documents. "Marcus Chen speaks very highly of your expertise in multi-jurisdictional projects." The meeting lasted 2 hours. We discussed zoning variances, environmental impact assessments, traffic studies, and infrastructure requirements. Throughout the conversation, Janet addressed me as an expert, asking for my recommendations rather than simply explaining her department's rules. When I suggested a phased approval process that would accelerate the timeline while ensuring compliance, she took notes and asked follow-up questions. "This is exactly the kind of strategic approach we need for a project this complex," she said as we wrapped up. "I'm confident we can work together effectively." Walking back to my car, I realized something fundamental had shifted. People weren't just treating me differently, I was acting differently. My voice was stronger, my suggestions more assertive, my entire bearing more confident. The external validation was changing my internal reality. The pattern repeated throughout the week. A meeting with the State Environmental Agency resulted in praise for my thorough preparation and understanding of regulatory requirements. The county traffic engineer complimented my analysis of infrastructure impacts. Even the notoriously difficult zoning board chairman, known for rejecting most development proposals, seemed impressed by the comprehensive presentation I'd prepared. "You've clearly done your homework," he said after reviewing my permit timeline. "Most consultants come in here with half-baked applications and wonder why we have questions. This is professional-grade work." Each positive interaction built on the last, creating a momentum I'd never experienced before. For the first time in my career, I wasn't apologizing for taking up people's time or wondering if I deserved to be in the room. I belonged here, and everyone seemed to recognize it. The financial transformation was equally dramatic. My first month's payment from Meridian was more than I'd made in the previous 6 months combined. I was able to pay off my credit cards, catch up on student loan payments, and still have money left over for things I'd considered luxuries, like grocery shopping without calculating every purchase, or buying professional clothes that didn't come from clearance racks. But perhaps the most satisfying change was how my existing clients responded to my new status. Patricia Williams called within days of seeing the announcement about my Meridian partnership in the local business journal. "Juliet, I just saw the news. I'm so proud of you, but I have to ask, does this mean you won't have time for small clients like me anymore?" "Patricia, you were one of the people who helped me build the reputation that made this opportunity possible. I'll always have time for clients who believed in me when I was just starting out." Her relief was audible. "I was hoping you'd say that. Because I have 3 friends who want to start their own businesses, and I told them they absolutely have to work with you. Apparently having the best regulatory consultant in New England as your advisor is quite the selling point." The phone didn't stop ringing. Word spread quickly through Millbrook Valley's small business community that I'd landed a major contract with a prestigious investment firm. Suddenly, entrepreneurs who had never given me a second glance were calling to schedule consultations. The woman who had been invisible at networking events was now the person everyone wanted to meet. "I heard you're the one who helped Patricia Williams navigate all those health department regulations," said Tom Bradley, owner of 3 local restaurants, during a consultation meeting. "I'm looking to expand into catering, and I need someone who understands the licensing requirements for mobile food service. And I heard you're working with that big development company now," added Lisa Chen, who was planning to open a yoga studio. "If you're good enough for them, you're definitely good enough for me." The irony wasn't lost on me that the same expertise I'd been offering for 3 years was suddenly in high demand simply because someone else had recognized its value first. Success, I was learning, was as much about perception as it was about competence. Marcus Chen noticed the change when we met for our weekly project update. "You seem different," he said as we reviewed the latest permit applications. "More confident. It's good to see." "It's easier to be confident when people actually listen to what you're saying," I replied, then immediately worried I'd sounded bitter. But Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I get it. For years, Melody told me stories about how your family treated you, how they never seemed to appreciate what you brought to the table. It must feel good to finally be recognized for what you're capable of." His casual mention of family conversations with Melody reminded me that there was still one area of my life that remained unchanged. While my professional world was flourishing, my personal relationships with the Ashfords remained frozen in the aftermath of the wedding incident. I'd had 3 missed calls from my mother over the past 2 weeks, but I hadn't returned them. Damien had sent 2 follow-up texts demanding that I call him back, both of which I deleted without reading completely. Even Clarissa had reached out, sending an Instagram message asking if I was okay, because I'd been acting weird lately. The truth was, I wasn't ready to engage with them yet. This new version of myself was still too fragile, too dependent on external validation from people who actually valued my contributions. I wasn't strong enough yet to withstand my family's inevitable attempts to diminish my achievements or pull me back into old patterns. But my growing confidence was making their absence feel less painful and more liberating. For the first time in my adult life, I was experiencing what it felt like to be valued, respected, and appreciated. The contrast with how my family had always treated me was becoming impossible to ignore. The breakthrough moment came during a site visit to the Riverside County development location. Marcus, Helena, and I spent the morning walking the property with the architectural team, discussing placement of buildings, environmental considerations, and infrastructure requirements. As we stood on a hilltop overlooking the 40-acre site, Helena turned to me with a question that 6 months ago would have terrified me. "Juliet, given your analysis of the regulatory landscape, what's your honest assessment of our timeline? Can we really get all approvals within 8 months?" 6 months ago, I would have hedged, qualified my answer, apologized for potential limitations. Instead, I looked out over the property, mentally reviewed the permit schedules I'd developed, and gave her a direct answer. "Yes, but only if we file the environmental impact assessment by next Friday and the zoning variance applications by the end of the month. Any delays beyond that, and we're looking at a 10-month timeline minimum." "What do you need to make that happen?" Marcus asked. "I need authorization to hire 2 temporary assistants for document preparation, and I need the architectural team to prioritize the stormwater management plans. Those are the 2 potential bottlenecks I can see." Helena nodded. "Done. What else?" "That's it. Everything else is already in motion." As we drove back to town, I realized what had just happened. 2 of the most successful business professionals I'd ever worked with had asked for my expert opinion, accepted my recommendations without question, and immediately committed resources based on my analysis. I wasn't just participating in this project, I was leading it. For someone who had spent her entire life being told she wasn't leadership material, the realization was intoxicating. I was good at this. Not just competent, not just adequate, but genuinely excellent at something that mattered. That evening, I called Melody to share the day's victories. "I'm so proud of you," she said after I'd described the site visit. You sound like a completely different person than you were 3 weeks ago. I feel like a different person. It's weird how much your confidence can change when people actually believe in you. The people who matter always believed in you, Juliet. You just finally started listening to them instead of to your family. After we hung up, I stood by my office window, looking out at downtown Millbrook Valley. The lights were coming on in buildings throughout the business district, marking the end of another productive day for dozens of entrepreneurs and professionals who were building something meaningful in this small community. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly part of that world, not watching from the outside, not grateful for scraps of opportunity, but actually belonging at the table where decisions were made and futures were shaped. The best part? This was just the beginning. The call came on a Tuesday morning in early November, exactly 6 weeks after I'd signed the Meridian contract. I was reviewing environmental impact assessments when my assistant, Rebecca, knocked on my office door with an expression I'd never seen before, equal parts excitement and disbelief. "Juliet, you need to take this call. It's about the Grandview Manor." My blood went cold. The Grandview Manor, site of my wedding humiliation, symbol of everything I'd been excluded from, the place where my brother had kicked me out in front of half of Millbrook Valley's elite society. "What about it?" I asked, though part of me already knew. There had been rumors circulating for weeks about the historic hotel's financial troubles, whispers in the business community about missed payments and declining bookings. "It's going into foreclosure. The bank is holding an auction next month and—" Rebecca paused, her eyes wide. "They want to know if Meridian Investment Group is interested in bidding." I stared at her, my mind racing. The Grandview Manor represented everything I'd never been allowed to have. Prestige, acceptance, a place at the table of Millbrook Valley's most important events. And now it was vulnerable, available, potentially mine. "Transfer the call to my line," I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. The conversation with First National Bank's commercial lending department lasted 20 minutes. The facts were stark. The Grandview Manor's owners had leveraged the property heavily during the pandemic to fund renovations that never materialized. Event bookings had plummeted, operating costs had soared, and 3 months of missed mortgage payments had triggered the foreclosure process. The auction was scheduled for December 15th. Minimum bid, $3.2 million. After hanging up, I sat in my office chair staring out at downtown Millbrook Valley, my mind spinning with possibilities I'd never dared to consider. The Grandview Manor wasn't just a hotel. It was the crown jewel of the local hospitality industry, the venue where every significant celebration in town took place. Owning it would mean owning a piece of Millbrook Valley's social infrastructure. More importantly, it would mean owning the place that had rejected me. I called Helena immediately. "Interesting timing," she said after I'd explained the situation. "We've actually been looking for hospitality investment opportunities in secondary markets. The Grandview Manor has excellent bones, historic charm, prime location, established reputation. With the right management and some strategic renovations, it could be incredibly profitable." "So Meridian would be interested in bidding?" "Possibly. But Juliet, I have to ask, is this about business or personal revenge? Because mixing the two rarely ends well." Her directness caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "Marcus mentioned your family's connection to the hotel, how you were treated at your brother's wedding there. I want to make sure we're making this decision based on financial merits, not emotional satisfaction." I considered lying, giving her the purely professional answer she was looking for. Instead, I found myself being honest. "Both," I admitted. "Yes, there's personal satisfaction in the idea of owning the place that excluded me. But Helena, I know this property better than any outside investor could. I know its strengths, its weaknesses, its place in the community. I know exactly what it could become with the right vision and investment. Tell me." For the next hour, I outlined a comprehensive vision for the Grandview Manor's transformation. Not just cosmetic updates, but a complete reimagining of what the property could offer. Boutique hotel rooms for destination weddings and weekend getaways. A farm-to-table restaurant featuring local ingredients. Conference facilities for regional business meetings. Event spaces that could accommodate everything from intimate celebrations to large corporate functions. The key, I explained, is understanding that Millbrook Valley is transitioning from a sleepy rural community to a desirable suburban destination. Young professionals are moving here for the quality of life, retirees are downsizing from the city, entrepreneurs are starting businesses. The Grandview Manor could be the centerpiece of that transformation. Helena was quiet for a long moment. That's actually brilliant. You're not just buying a hotel, you're buying a platform for community development. The question is, do you have the experience to manage something this complex? I have something better than experience, I replied. I have connections throughout the community and a deep understanding of what this place means to people. Plus, I'd be working with Meridian's resources and expertise. It's the perfect combination of local knowledge and professional capability. Send me a detailed business plan by Friday. If the numbers work, we'll seriously consider it. The next 3 days were a blur of spreadsheets, market analysis, and strategic planning. I researched comparable properties throughout New England, analyzed local demographic trends, and created financial projections for the first 5 years of operation. I consulted with contractors about renovation costs, spoke with local farmers about supply partnerships for the restaurant, and even reached out to wedding planners to understand the event market. But the most important conversation was with Marcus, who had been unusually quiet since I'd mentioned the Grandview Manor opportunity. "You're really going to do this, aren't you?" he said during our weekly project meeting. "If the business case makes sense, yes. Why? Do you think it's a bad idea?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, choosing his words carefully. "Financially, it could be brilliant. The property is undervalued. The market is right for this kind of development, and your vision is solid. But Juliet, buying the place where your family humiliated you, that's a big psychological step. Are you sure you're ready for that?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, right now you're building a new identity based on professional success and peer recognition. That's healthy growth. But if you buy the Grandview Manor, you'll be confronting your old identity directly. Your family, the community that watched you get kicked out of your brother's wedding, they'll all have opinions about what this means." I hadn't considered that angle. In my excitement about the business opportunity, I'd focused on the satisfaction of ownership rather than the social implications of the purchase. "You think I'm not strong enough to handle that?" "I think you're stronger than you've ever been, but strength untested isn't the same as strength proven. Buying that hotel will make you a very public figure in this community. Everyone will have an opinion about your success, your motivations, your right to be there. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny?" That evening, I drove to the Grandview Manor and sat in my car in the parking lot, studying the building that had loomed so large in my personal mythology. The ivy-covered stone walls, the elegant arched windows, the circular driveway where luxury cars had deposited wedding guests just weeks earlier. For 27 years, this place had represented everything I couldn't have: acceptance, belonging, social status. Now it might represent everything I could become. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Heard you might be interested in the manor. Interesting development. We should talk." "Damien." I stared at the message, my heart rate spiking. Somehow my brother had already heard about my potential involvement in the auction. In a town the size of Millbrook Valley, news traveled fast, but this was faster than I'd expected. More texts followed over the next hour. From my mother: "Juliet, your father and I would like to discuss this hotel situation. Please call us." From Clarissa: "OMG, is it true you're trying to buy the Grandview Manor? This is insane. Call me immediately." Even my father sent a message: "We need to have a family meeting about your recent business ventures. Sunday dinner, 6 p.m. For the first time in weeks, the familiar anxiety crept back in. My family's sudden interest in my life, their presumption that I owed them explanations or consultations about my decisions. The automatic assumption that they had a right to weigh in on my choices. But something else was happening too. As I read their messages, I realized I wasn't afraid of their disapproval anymore. 6 weeks of professional success, of being valued and respected, of making decisions based on my own judgment rather than their expectations. It had changed something fundamental in how I saw myself in relation to them. I wasn't the excluded daughter anymore. I was a successful business consultant with a multi-million-dollar contract and the resources to bid on major properties. I didn't need their permission, their approval, or their input. I deleted all their messages without responding. Then I called Helena. I've made my decision, I said. I want to move forward with the Grandview Manor acquisition, not just as a Meridian investment, but as my own personal project with Meridian backing. I want my name on the deed. Are you sure? Once we announce our intention to bid, there's no going back. This will be very public, very visible. Your entire community will know that you're serious about changing your place in the social hierarchy. I'm sure. For the first time in my life, I'm absolutely certain about what I want and why I deserve to have it. Then let's make it happen. Send me the final business plan tomorrow, and we'll start the bidding process. As I drove home from the Grandview Manor that night, I realized that everything had changed. This wasn't just about buying a hotel or even about personal vindication. This was about completely rewriting the story of who I was in this community, transforming from the excluded daughter into someone who owned the very place that had excluded her. The girl who had been kicked out of her brother's wedding was about to become the woman who owned the venue where it happened. Everything that came next would be on my terms. The news of my potential bid on the Grandview Manor spread through Millbrook Valley like wildfire, and with it came a coordinated campaign from my family that was both predictable and vicious. It started with my mother showing up at my office unannounced on Wednesday morning, sweeping past Rebecca's desk with the kind of imperious confidence that had intimidated me for most of my life. "Juliet, we need to talk immediately," Vivian announced, settling into the chair across from my desk without invitation. She looked perfectly put together as always: designer handbag, tailored coat, the kind of understated jewelry that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. "I'm in the middle of a workday, Mom. You can't just—" "Don't be ridiculous. Family comes first, and this hotel nonsense has gone far enough." She crossed her legs and fixed me with the look that had ended countless childhood arguments. "Your father and I have discussed this situation extensively, and we've decided you need to withdraw your interest in the property immediately." The audacity took my breath away. "Excuse me? You're embarrassing the family, Juliet. The entire community is talking about your acquisition attempts. People are saying you're being vindictive, that you're trying to buy your way into relevance. It's unseemly." I stared at her, noting how she'd positioned my success as something shameful, my ambition as something inappropriate. Classic Vivian, unable to celebrate her daughter's achievements, she reframed them as character flaws. "What's unseemly," I said carefully, "is a mother trying to sabotage her daughter's business opportunities because they don't fit her social expectations." Vivian's perfectly applied lipstick tightened into a thin line. "Business opportunities? Darling, you're a small-town permit consultant who got lucky with one contract. Don't let it go to your head. The Grandview Manor is a serious investment requiring serious people. You're simply not qualified." There it was, the poison I'd been drinking for 27 years, delivered with a smile and wrapped in maternal concern. The message that I wasn't enough, would never be enough, should be grateful for whatever scraps came my way. But something had changed in the 6 weeks since the wedding. Instead of the familiar sting of inadequacy, I felt something else. Anger. Pure, clean anger at the woman who had spent my entire childhood convincing me I was lesser than my siblings, who had sabotaged my college applications, who was now trying to sabotage my business success. "You're right about one thing," I said, standing up from my desk. "I am not the same person you raised. That person would have apologized for taking up space, for having ambitions, for daring to want something you didn't think I deserved. But that person doesn't exist anymore." "Juliet, don't be dramatic." "I'm not being dramatic, I'm being honest. For the first time in my life, I'm surrounded by people who value my abilities, who trust my judgment, who believe I'm capable of success. And you know what the difference is between them and you? They actually know me. They've seen my work, they've witnessed my competence, they've benefited from my expertise." Vivian's composure cracked slightly. "We know you better than anyone." "No, you know the version of me you created, the disappointing daughter, the family obligation, the one who should be grateful for whatever attention you're willing to spare. But that's not who I actually am." My phone rang, displaying Helena's number. I answered it without taking my eyes off my mother. "Juliet, excellent news. The bank has accepted our pre-qualification documents. We're officially approved to bid up to $4.5 million for the Grandview Manor. Congratulations. You're about to become a hotel owner. Thank you, Helena. I'll call you back in 10 minutes to discuss next steps. When I hung up, my mother's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. $4.5 million? She whispered. That's right. Turns out the small-town permit consultant who isn't qualified for serious investments has access to serious money. Funny how that works. Vivian left without another word, but I knew the conversation was far from over. The next assault came from Damien, who called that evening with a proposal that was both insulting and revealing. I've been thinking about this hotel situation, he said without preamble, and I have a solution that could work for everyone. I'm listening. What if we formed a family partnership? You bring your financing connections, I bring my business experience and social credibility. We could buy the property together, maybe turn it into a real success story. I almost laughed. Let me understand this correctly. You want to partner with someone you kicked out of your own wedding? Someone you told didn't belong in your family? That was a misunderstanding. Priscilla was stressed about the seating arrangements, and I was trying to keep the peace. You know how weddings can be. No, Damien, I don't know how weddings can be, because I've never been allowed to attend one where I was actually welcomed. Look, we're both adults here. Let's put personal issues aside and focus on the business opportunity. The Grandview Manor would benefit from having the Ashford name officially attached to the ownership. The Ashford name? My voice rose, despite my efforts to stay calm. You mean the name that comes with the reputation for excluding family members from major life events? That Ashford name? Juliet, be reasonable. I am being reasonable. Reasonably successful, reasonably confident, and reasonable enough to recognize that you're only interested in partnering with me now that I have something you want. That's not fair. What's not fair is spending 27 years treating someone like they're worthless, then expecting them to share their success with you when circumstances change. I hung up on him, my hands shaking with adrenaline. The final attack came from an unexpected source, the Millbrook Valley community itself. By Friday, gossip about my hotel bid had morphed into something uglier. Rebecca brought me printouts of comments from the local online forums that made my stomach churn. She's obviously in over her head. New money trying to buy respect. Some people don't know their place. Must be nice to have rich friends bail you out of obscurity. The criticism stung because it echoed my own deepest fears, that I didn't deserve this success, that I was pretending to be something I wasn't, that everyone could see through my newfound confidence to the insecure girl underneath. But the worst part was recognizing my family's influence in the narrative. The talking points were too specific, too focused on my supposed inadequacies, too perfectly crafted to undermine my credibility. Someone had been spreading information designed to make my bid seem inappropriate, presumptuous, doomed to failure. The breaking point came Saturday morning when I found my father waiting by my car in the office parking lot. Your mother is worried about you, Richard said without preamble. She thinks you're making decisions based on emotion rather than logic. And what do you think, Dad? He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with the analytical expression he typically reserved for business negotiations. I think you're more capable than your mother, and I gave you credit for. But I also think you're about to make a very expensive mistake. Because I'm not qualified to run a hotel? Because you're buying it for the wrong reasons. Revenge is a poor business strategy, Juliet. Even if you can afford the purchase price, can you afford the social cost? Millbrook Valley is a small community. If you succeed, people will resent you for it. If you fail, they'll say they knew you would all along. His honesty caught me off guard. For the first time in years, my father was talking to me like an adult, acknowledging both my capabilities and the challenges I faced. So what would you do? I asked. I'd probably do exactly what you're doing, he admitted, but I'd make sure I had the strength to handle whatever came next. Success changes how people see you, but it also changes how they treat you. Not everyone will be happy about your transformation. As he walked away, I realized that my father had just given me the most valuable gift he could. His honest assessment that I was strong enough to handle the consequences of my choices, even if those consequences were difficult. The auction was in 2 weeks. My family had shown their true colors. The community was watching with a mixture of fascination and skepticism, and my entire future in Millbrook Valley hinged on whether I could turn the Grandview Manor into the success I'd promised. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of their judgment. I had built something real, created value that couldn't be dismissed or diminished by other people's opinions. The girl who had been kicked out of her brother's wedding was about to buy the venue where it happened, and no amount of family sabotage or community gossip was going to stop her. The night before the auction, I sat alone in my office at 2 a.m., surrounded by financial documents and legal papers, wondering if I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. The bidding was set to begin at 10 a.m. sharp at the Riverside County Courthouse. I had spent weeks preparing, securing financing, reviewing property inspections, finalizing my business plan. But now, in the quiet darkness before dawn, all my confidence seemed to evaporate like morning mist. My phone showed 17 missed calls from various family members over the past 48 hours, none of which I had returned. The local online forums were buzzing with speculation about my bid, most of it negative. Ashford family outcast trying to buy her way back into relevance. Small-time consultant in over her head. This will end badly. But it wasn't the public criticism that was eating at me. It was something Helena had said during our final strategy meeting that afternoon. Juliet, I need you to be absolutely certain about this. Not just financially, but emotionally. Because once you own that property, you'll be taking on more than a business. You'll be taking on a symbol. Everything you do with the Grandview Manor will be scrutinized, judged, and dissected by this community. Success will require not just money and business acumen, but psychological resilience. Are you sure you're ready for that level of exposure? At the time, I'd answered confidently, yes, I was ready. Yes, I could handle the pressure. Yes, this was the right decision. Now, sitting in the pre-dawn darkness, I wasn't sure of anything. What if they were all right? What if I was just the disappointing Ashford daughter trying to buy respect I hadn't earned? What if my recent professional success was a fluke, a temporary streak of luck that would evaporate the moment I took on something truly challenging? I pulled up the financial projections on my laptop screen for the 100th time. The numbers were solid. The hotel could be profitable within 18 months with the right management and marketing strategy. But numbers on a spreadsheet were different from the messy reality of running a hospitality business, in a community where half the people were rooting for you to fail. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Can't sleep either, coffee in an hour? At 3 a.m., we sat in the only all-night diner in town, 2 cups of coffee growing cold between us, as I voiced every doubt and fear that had been building for weeks. What if I'm doing this for the wrong reasons? I asked. What if this is just elaborate revenge disguised as a business opportunity? Marcus stirred his coffee thoughtfully. Does the motivation matter if the outcome is positive? You're not buying the hotel to destroy it or to hurt people. You're buying it to transform it into something better. The fact that it also addresses some personal pain doesn't make it less valid. But what if I fail? What if I can't make it work? The whole community will say they knew I wasn't qualified. And if you succeed, some of them will say you didn't deserve it. Juliet, you can't control what other people think or say about you. You can only control your own actions and decisions. He leaned forward, his expression becoming more intense. But I have to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. If this property was any other hotel in any other town, would you still want to buy it? I considered the question seriously. Yes. The business opportunity is solid, regardless of the location. The historical significance, the market position, the potential for growth. It's exactly the kind of investment I would recommend to any client. Then trust your professional judgment. You've spent 3 years building expertise in this industry. Your success rate with clients is remarkable. Your analysis of regulatory environments is better than consultants, with decades more experience. Why would you suddenly doubt your competence now? Because the stakes are higher. Because this time it's my money, my reputation, my future on the line. Which is exactly why you'll succeed. You have more invested in this than any outside investor could. You understand this community, this property, this opportunity better than anyone else bidding tomorrow. We talked until dawn, Marcus helping me work through every scenario, every risk, every potential challenge. By the time the sun rose over downtown Millbrook Valley, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Clarity. I was doing this because it was the right business decision, supported by solid analysis and backed by adequate resources. The personal satisfaction was a bonus, not the primary motivation. But that clarity shattered 3 hours later when I arrived at the courthouse and saw who else was there. Damien stood near the courthouse steps in an expensive suit, talking animatedly with two men I didn't recognize. But it was the woman beside him who made my blood run cold. Priscilla Whitmore Ashford, his new wife, whose family controlled significant real estate interests throughout the region. My brother caught sight of me and walked over with the kind of confident stride that had intimidated me throughout childhood. "Juliet, I was hoping we could talk before this gets started." "There's nothing to discuss, Damien." "Actually, there is. I want you to know that Priscilla's family has decided to bid on the property as well. They have substantial resources." The implication was clear. They could outbid me, and they would. "Why are you telling me this?" Damien's expression softened slightly, and for a moment he looked like the brother I'd once idolized. "Because it doesn't have to be a competition. We could still work together on this. Pool our resources, combine our expertise. You have the regulatory knowledge, we have the hospitality connections, and the capital to really make this work. After everything that's happened, you still think I'd want to partner with you? I think you're smarter than your pride. This is a business decision, Juliet. Don't let personal feelings cloud your judgment." I stared at him, recognizing the manipulation tactic he'd used since we were children. Frame my emotional responses as weaknesses, my desire for respect as pride, my boundaries as poor judgment. "You're right," I said quietly. "This is a business decision, which is why I'm going to make it based on what's best for my business, not what's convenient for our family." At 9:45 a.m., I sat in the courthouse auction room surrounded by potential bidders, real estate investors, and curious onlookers. The Whitmore family contingent took up an entire row, their presence radiating the kind of old money confidence that had always made me feel small. Helena had flown in from Boston to be here, sitting beside me as moral support and financial backup. "Remember," she whispered, "we're approved up to $4.5 million, but don't bid emotionally. If it goes above fair market value, we walk away." The auctioneer called the room to order, and I felt my heart rate spike. This was it. The moment that would determine whether I could transform from the excluded daughter into someone who owned her own place at the table. The bidding started at $2 million and escalated quickly. By the time it reached $3.5 million, only 3 bidders remained: myself, the Whitmore family group, and a hotel investment company from Albany. At $4 million, the Albany company dropped out. At $4.2 million, I was bidding against my brother's in-laws, the same family whose daughter had married into the Ashford name while I was relegated to exile. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. $4.3 million, called the Whitmore representative. Helena leaned over. "That's our limit. One more bid, then we're done." I looked across the room at Damien, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Triumph? Concern? Regret? $4.4 million, I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. The room fell silent. The Whitmore group huddled in whispered conversation. The auctioneer repeated my bid, asking for $4.5 million. The silence stretched. Going once at $4.4 million. I held my breath. Going twice. The Whitmore representative raised his hand. $4.6 million. Helena shook her head firmly. We were done. I sat frozen as the auctioneer called for higher bids. As the room waited to see if I would exceed my limit. As my chance to own the Grandview Manor slipped away at the hands of my brother's extended family. Sold to the Whitmore Group for $4.6 million. The gavel fell like a thunderclap. I had lost. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt the weight of everyone's eyes on me. The disappointed daughter who had reached too high. The small-town consultant who had been outclassed by real money and real power. Helena tried to console me in the parking lot. It was the right decision financially. That price was above market value. You showed discipline by not overbidding emotionally. But her words felt hollow. This hadn't been just about money. It had been about transformation, about proving that I could claim a place in a world that had always excluded me. Instead, I had been reminded that some doors remain closed no matter how successful you become, no matter how much you accomplish, no matter how far you climb. As I drove home alone, I realized that losing the Grandview Manor hadn't just cost me a business opportunity. It had cost me the dream of completely rewriting my story, of transforming from victim to victor in the most public way possible. I was still successful. I still had my thriving consulting business and my Meridian contract. But I was also still the Ashford daughter who didn't quite belong, who could be outbid and outmaneuvered by the very people who had rejected her. The question now was, what do you do when your grand gesture of transformation is defeated by the same forces that have held you back your entire life? 6 months after losing the Grandview Manor auction, I stood in the ballroom of the newly opened Riverside Valley Resort, watching 300 guests celebrate the grand opening of what had become the most successful hospitality venture in the region's history. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was hosting this celebration in a venue that had started as a consolation prize. After the auction defeat, I had spent weeks wallowing in a mixture of disappointment and self-doubt. The loss of the Grandview Manor felt like confirmation of every limitation my family had ever imposed on me, every whispered criticism about my qualifications, every doubt about whether I truly belonged in the world I was trying to enter. But it was Patricia Williams who had helped me see the situation differently. "You know what I realized when I heard about the auction?" she said during one of our regular coffee meetings 2 weeks after my defeat. "You were trying to buy back your past instead of building your future." "What do you mean?" "The Grandview Manor represented everything you'd been excluded from, right? Your brother's wedding, your family's social circle, all those fancy events you were never quite welcome at. But Juliet, you don't need to buy your way into their world anymore. You've already built your own." She was right, though it took me several more weeks to fully understand what she meant. The breakthrough came when Marcus called with an unexpected opportunity. Meridian had acquired a 200-acre property in Riverside County, the same location where we'd been working on the mixed-use development. The original hotel component of the project had been scaled back due to budget constraints, but now they wanted to explore building something from scratch. "What if," Marcus suggested, "instead of trying to rescue an old venue with old associations, you created something completely new? Something that reflects your vision rather than trying to transform someone else's?" The idea terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. Buying the Grandview Manor would have been acquiring an established business with a known reputation. Building a resort from the ground up meant creating something entirely my own, with all the risks and rewards that entailed. But the financial projections were compelling, and more importantly, the creative freedom was intoxicating. Instead of working within the constraints of a historic property, I could design every aspect of the guest experience from scratch. I spent 3 months developing the concept, a boutique resort that combined luxury accommodations with authentic local experiences. Farm-to-table dining featuring ingredients from local producers. Event spaces designed for intimate celebrations rather than massive gatherings. Conference facilities that attracted regional businesses looking for inspiring locations for strategic retreats. Most importantly, I designed it as a place where people would feel genuinely welcomed rather than merely tolerated. The construction process was grueling. 18 months of permit applications, contractor negotiations, staff hiring, and marketing development. There were weeks when I worked 80-hour schedules, managing everything from landscape architecture to linen procurement. But unlike the anxiety I'd felt about the Grandview Manor, this project filled me with energetic purpose. Every decision was mine to make. Every detail reflected my vision of what hospitality could be when it was rooted in genuine care, rather than social hierarchy. The resort opened 3 months ago to reviews that exceeded my wildest expectations. "A hidden gem that redefines luxury hospitality in New England," wrote the travel critic for Boston Magazine. "The Riverside Valley Resort doesn't just offer accommodations, it offers transformation," declared the Regional Tourism Board. More importantly, it was booked solid for the next 8 months. Tonight's grand opening celebration was the culmination of everything I'd built, but it was also something more personal. As I looked around the ballroom, filled with local business owners, Meridian executives, resort staff, and community leaders, I realized I had accomplished something I'd never thought possible. I had created a space where I truly belonged, and where others felt welcome to belong alongside me. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, taking the microphone as the evening's program began, "thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate not just the opening of a resort, but the creation of a new kind of community gathering place." In the crowd, I could see familiar faces that told the story of my transformation. Patricia Williams, whose bakery now supplied our restaurant with artisanal breads and desserts. David Kim, whose auto shop had expanded to include a second location after I'd helped him navigate the permits. Sarah Martinez, whose educational toy company had become so successful that she'd rented one of our conference rooms for her first major investor presentation. Helena and Marcus sat at a table near the front, both beaming with pride. They had taken a chance on a small-town consultant with big dreams, and now they were minority partners in one of the region's most successful hospitality ventures. But the most significant moment came when I spotted a familiar figure near the back of the room. My father, looking uncomfortable in a tuxedo that he probably hadn't worn since Damien's wedding. After my speech, he approached me cautiously. "Juliet, this is impressive, really impressive." "Thank you for coming, Dad. I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't. Your mother thought it would be awkward, given everything that's happened. But I wanted to see what you'd built." We stood in awkward silence for a moment, both of us aware of the years of misunderstanding and missed opportunities that lay between us. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "For Westfield, for the wedding, for not seeing what you were capable of until it was impossible to ignore." "I appreciate that. The thing is, I always knew you were smart, Juliet, but I thought you needed protecting, managing, guidance. I didn't realize that what you actually needed was the chance to show what you could do without interference." It wasn't a complete reconciliation, too much damage had been done for that, but it was acknowledgement. Recognition that I had become someone worth respecting not because I'd bought my way into their world, but because I'd built my own. As the evening wound down, I stepped out onto the resort's terrace overlooking the valley. The lights of Millbrook Valley twinkled in the distance, and I could just make out the silhouette of the Grandview Manor against the horizon. I felt no bitterness about losing that auction anymore. The Grandview Manor would always be a symbol of exclusion for me, a place where acceptance came with conditions and belonging was contingent on someone else's approval. The Riverside Valley Resort was something entirely different. It was proof that sometimes the best way to respond to rejection isn't to fight your way into spaces that don't want you, but to create spaces where everyone is genuinely welcome. My phone buzzed with a message from Melody in Seattle. "Saw the photos online. The resort looks incredible. When can I visit?" I typed back, "Anytime. You'll always have a place at my table." As I sent the message, I thought about how different those words sounded now compared to 8 months ago, when I'd been desperately trying to earn a seat at someone else's table. I had learned that true belonging isn't something you can buy or achieve through external validation. It's something you create by building spaces where your authentic self is not just welcome, but valued. The girl who had been kicked out of her brother's wedding was gone. In her place stood a woman who owned her own venue, who employed 37 people, who had created something beautiful and successful from her own vision and determination. But more importantly, I had become someone who understood that the most powerful transformation isn't changing yourself to fit into existing spaces. It's creating new spaces where transformation is possible for everyone. As I walked back into my resort, greeting guests and saying goodnight to staff members who had become like family, I realized that I had finally found what I'd been searching for all along. Not acceptance from people who had never really known me, but the confidence to build a life that reflected who I actually was. And that, I understood now, had always been the real victory. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.